So hi everyone, welcome to the next session for YA ThrillerCon. I'm Madeline Dyer and I'm joined today by Posie Lewis, who is the narrator for my book A Dangerous Game. So welcome Posie, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, it's great to finally meet you as well, because we've been sort of corresponding through email for quite a while now as you've been narrating my book. So yeah, it's just really cool to actually meet you like this.
Well, it's amazing too, because I feel like I've become quite intimately acquainted with your writing, and I've been, performing your book by myself for the past 2 months. And so it's great to finally meet you and see the face behind the story.
Yeah, definitely. So do you want to sort of just start by telling viewers of how you got into the sort of audiobook industry?
Sure. So I'm a professionally trained actor, and when the COVID pandemic began, it aligned with my graduation from college, and I was home, as was everyone else, and I was feeling, in the midst of my isolation, confused about how to express myself artistically. We were all, I think, forced into a position of having to really reassess, especially for those of us who work collaboratively as artists. How do we share our art now? And how do we work creatively when we're used to working in collaboration? I'm very accustomed to being one of a cast of many, working on a project in tandem, in person, in a rehearsal studio together. And suddenly all of that was gone. And so I came into the world of audiobooks actually through podcasting and working with in radio. And so I started a few months into the pandemic. I began producing my own podcast and radio show, which is called Write It Down. And I created it as a storytelling space to showcase personal essays and short fiction read aloud by their authors. So I started to produce episodes featuring my own writing that I was reading aloud myself in my bedroom. And then I started to share the works of other writers that wanted their work to be shown and heard on the podcast. And I started to enjoy that so much. The intimacy of the audio world is a really beautiful thing. And when I started to tell stories in that way, I became addicted to it. And I became completely fascinated in how close you can feel to a story and how close you can feel to a person just by listening to them speak to you as though you're right there, you're right next to them. It gave me a sense of closeness that I couldn't find anywhere else, as we were all, so separated from one another. And then I started to explore audiobook narration and thought to myself, wow, well, this is kind of a blend of the best of both worlds for me. The world of working on a full-scale production, but also working on it completely alone was a real challenge, and also is a challenge that is extremely exciting. Every day, sitting down to record a new chapter is sitting down to explore the voices, literally, of tons of new characters and tons of new people. And especially in the thriller genre, it has given me just a sense of excitement and a sense of closeness to many people, many voices, just alone in my own space.
Yeah, I love sort of how your passion is coming across just through you talking about sort of audiobook narration. It's so real. I can always reach out and touch it is just amazing. And it's so great that you're just such a passionate narrator as well. Because well, I listened to the sample that the retail sample for A Dangerous Game with that audio a few days ago, and I was just blown away by how amazing it sounded. You really brought the story to life. And yeah, you've got that same sense of passion now just talking about it. So it's really nice just listening to you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it was exciting to send that to you too, because no one has, I've been narrating this book for, A Dangerous Game has been in the works for, several months now, and it's about to be released, and I'm so excited for people to finally be able to listen to it.
Yeah, me too. Like, I can't wait to actually listen to the whole thing myself, because like that's audio sample was just like phenomenal. I was
Oh,
so happy with that. Like, I texted all my friends saying I've just listened to the most amazing thing. I can't tell you all about it yet, but I just had to know someone because like it was just incredible. Um,
thank you so
yeah,
much.
like you really brought my main character Keely to life. So yeah, when you're narrating an audiobook, do you have to sort of like relate to the main character in order to sort of like really feel their story? Or can you sort of narrate any sort of book that you're sort of given, or do you need like the personal connection?
I think that for me, and this is true for any, I think, role as an actor is, it's for me all about trying to find the connection, even if it's not immediately apparent to me. So I've had plenty of experiences where I've played a character or explored a role or been involved in a story that has had no narrative overlap to my life. And I will sometimes start feeling like, wow, I have absolutely no idea why this character does what they do, because I would never do that, or I would make a completely different decision in that situation. And those are the stories and the characters that are the most interesting and the most fun for me to explore. The ones where I can't immediately make sense of why the character does what they do or why their story evolves in the way that it does. And I think that ultimately has to rely on my own sense of like a, a sort of ability to look at um the world of the character, which in this case was given to me by you, and um, and rely on the storytelling as it exists before I come into the picture. Rely on the storytelling to give me a sense of what are this character's circumstances? What is this character's history that has shaped them into who they are? This person that relies on, these tactics to achieve what they want. Um, so that it makes sense to me, even if I don't have any experiences that align with theirs. And I think that's true for A Dangerous Game too. I mean, I don't live in a dystopian universe.
Yeah.
I'm not a trained assassin. And yet there are elements of Keely's journey and Keely's story that feel very evocative and very close to me just as a human being, even beyond me as like also a relatively young woman. Keely and I are about the same age, but just from a human nature point of view, we all know what it feels like to want something badly. We all know what it feels like to lose something in a very painful way, and we all know what it feels like um, to be confused too. I think that's something that I'm often drawn to in characters, and that really always interested me about Keely is that, the characters that don't arrive in the story fully formed. They're fully formed people, but they're still very much figuring out who they are and who they want to be. And those are the stories that feel the most close to me, even if I don't understand how they're traveling through their story. It's a progression that feels exciting for me to jump into.
Yeah, definitely. Like I know when I was writing A Dangerous Game, one of the things I was sort of keeping at the front of my mind was that it was going to be a story about identity and about like discovering yourself and who you are. So yeah, and like when you're talking about that's sort of like the bit that you related to Keely on, that really makes sense to me, because I was trying to provide that connection for readers. So yeah, it's really interesting hearing you say that as well, because obviously it's a first person narration as well that the book is told in. So it is a really sort of like deep point of view. And
Yes.
yeah, so yeah, like I'm so excited to be talking to you. I'm just like, I came up with so many questions before, but now they've all just like gone from my mind. But yeah.
Well, but I think what you're saying too about the first person narration, you know, I'm always so interested in that from a storytelling perspective, the I, and the ability to speak as the character, especially in the world of audiobooks, I think is a particularly exciting thing. And it doesn't always work in, that, not every author can sort of rise to the occasion of having like a storytelling style and a storytelling pace and a sense of really evocative language, because I think sometimes the challenging thing about being an audiobook narrator is that you're not there to make changes to the story. The story arrives to you fully realized, and it's my job to bring it into the air. And not to say, oh, I think this should be different, or this word choice is not my job. And so when you can narrate a story that has already just a very exciting pace, a very strong sense of action and adventure, and a clear progression through these, very transformative events that happen in a dangerous game. It makes the job of narrating all the more sort of sparkly, because that sparkle comes from being able to play with the sounds of the words, and I only have the words that the author has given me. So it's exciting. And I mean, do you ever read your work aloud, and do you ever think about, when you're writing, like how the words sound when they're read, or is that kind of not as much in your mind as you're writing?
So yeah, like I do sort of like think about the rhythm of the sentences when I'm writing, because like I also write poetry, and I do sort of like incorporate almost sort of a poetic tone in some of the scenes in my prose books, especially like with the imagery. So I'm really drawn to sort of like beautiful imagery, evocative language. But yeah, the only time I really read it out loud is when I'm doing sort of like the final read through before it goes like off to a publisher or off to a printer, and I read it out loud then to find the typos. But yeah, with A Dangerous Game, actually, when I was I think, yeah, when I was sort of going to do that, like reading out loud, I was actually really ill, and I couldn't like speak much because my throat was so sore. So instead, I got my laptop to read it out to me. So I had this really robotic voice, sort of like ill, and it just like destroyed the whole rhythm of every single sentence. And I was just like, okay, this isn't really working, because it's just making me hate this book and making me think it's terrible. So I had to stop that, and then like I got a delay, like an extension on the deadline for it. So then I was able to wait until like I had recovered a bit, and then I was able to do like the speaking part. But yeah, like I sort of only read it out loud at that stage to sort of find any typos or missing words. So yeah, I don't know whether like I could give it a try and just sort of like read it out loud at an earlier stage. Because yeah, I definitely pay attention to the rhythm of sentences when I'm talking, when I'm writing. And yeah, with with dialogue as well, I often sort of like, if I'm stuck in a scene and I'm writing and I get stuck and I don't know what the next bit of dialogue will be, I'll sometimes read out just the dialogue to make sure it sounds like authentic or realistic. But yeah, most of my writing is done in complete silence, with me just like staring at the laptop.
Yeah, and I think that's probably, I mean, from writers that I've spoken to, and certainly in my own experience writing my own work, like that seems to be generally the case, right? Like, we sort of write in the comfort of our own heads.
Yeah.
And so like hearing a story come out off the page is such a crazy thing. I mean, I can imagine for you after writing this entire universe into existence and, spending so long, um, you know, thinking through the rhythm and the structure of each of these sentences and chapters and books as a whole, to finally hear them read not by a robotic voice but
Yeah.
by a breathing human, is probably kind of surreal.
Yeah, well, it totally is. And like, when I listened to that, well, when I first heard your audition, which is like January, I think it was, maybe February, I don't know, can't remember now. But yeah, when I heard your audition, I was just like almost stunned by how, like, at the same time, it sounded like my work, but it sounded so different as well. And it was like it introduced this whole new dimension to it.
Hmm.
Yeah, then when I heard like the finished sort of like retail sample of the audio, it just sounded, it was really surreal listening to it. It's like almost magical. Because it's like it's my words, but then it's like almost your interpretation of my words. Um and yeah, I was just like blown away by like how amazing it sounded. So yeah,
Oh,
thank
thank you.
you.
Thank you. Thank you. I think too, I'm also curious to hear just through the lens of the thriller genre, um, how that has sort of influenced the way that you write and the way that you pace your novels. Because for me, I felt, you know, communicating that sense of suspense
Mhm.
and action, is such a delicate balance when you are narrating to someone in a very sort of close way. Like in audiobook narration, we talk about like, how you are inside the listener's ear, and how close you are to them, and how you have to really be cognizant of that the entire time
Mhm.
that you're narrating, not to sort of scream in someone's ear. But to be aware of that they're right there with you.
Mhm.
And I I found that so exciting as I was narrating A Dangerous Game, to be communicating this sense of action and thrill, while also experimenting with being so connected to the
Mhm.
listener as I imagined them. And I just am so interested in that process of writing in a style like that, and being conscious of that, um, when you're structuring words on a page, but
Mhm.
then bringing that off the page and into a sense of, okay, now the words are living in the air. And what does that do, you know?
Yeah, no, totally. Because like A Dangerous Game for me is a bit of a weird book in a way, because it's very much a dystopian thriller, but it's also like genre blend as well, because there's like the
Mm.
romance in it, and then the romance becomes more of sort of like romantic suspense. You
Mhm.
you've got a lot of like commentary about identity, about friendship, about family as well, and then you've got sort of like secrets, betrayals, regrets, and there is quite a lot of like talk as well around Keely's mental health. And all of these sort of like aspects, like when I was writing it, I didn't think I was writing a thriller, because at
Mm.
that point, I'd written 4 other books in the same world, which is the Untamed series, which is 4 books all narrated by the character Seven. And then as I was working on that series, the character for Keely was just getting more and more loud in my head. I was just like, I need to write her story because I needed to know more about her. So I just started like writing her story with no plan whatsoever, didn't plot out anything, didn't do any outlines. I just wrote it to see where it took me. And I noticed that straight away the pace and retention, well, retention was getting a lot higher. The pacing was getting a lot faster than the previous 4 books set in the same world.
Mm.
So it was then that I was thinking, oh, well, this is becoming a bit more sort of like thriller-esque. And I was then sort of like paying more attention to sort of the structure of the manuscript. And I went back and did like a massive like overhaul as well of the first half in order to sort of cement it a bit more to the second half, because it had almost ended up being written in two halves. So it was like the dystopian half at the beginning and then like the thriller sort of like chase aspect at the end. So I did go back over and smooth it all through. But yeah, like I didn't realize I was writing sort of like this dystopian thriller at that point, and that sort of like only became apparent to me towards the end of the book. And it's really weird because I loved writing that book so much. It was so much fun. And I think because I didn't really know where it was going and I was just like having to surprise myself as I was writing, that I got so invested. And then I actually made it into like the start of a trilogy as well, because I just found I loved writing dystopian thrillers. So the sequel published last year as well, and that's called This Vicious Way. And that is another dystopian thriller set in the same world, like different characters. But yeah, just sort of like enabling like myself just to like write freely, write what I wanted to, and not sort of like be restrained at all. I found that so helpful, and I found I was also like moving more into thriller territory. And I don't know whether that is because at that same time I was also writing a contemporary thriller. I don't know if it sort of like bled across into like the dystopian stuff, but yeah, like now at the moment I mainly class myself as a thriller writer because I write YA thrillers, like contemporary thrillers, and then I've also got these like little series of dystopian thrillers. But yeah, I love fast paced now. Like anything that I write has to be fast paced, otherwise I lose interest in it.
That's so interesting. I love hearing about you trying to almost find your way through this story, and that you not knowing where the story is going to go is what enables you to write in the thriller genre, because you are sort of forced to keep yourself on your toes, which translates then to writing a thriller that keeps a reader or an audiobook listener guessing, because you are also kind of finding your way through the story in that way. That's so exciting.
Yeah, definitely. Because I mean, I've tried outlining and plotting thrillers before, and as soon as I outline, I have no motivation to write the story because I feel like I've already done it, and it has to be like that new and exciting sort of like atmosphere for me, because I have to feel that I'm sort of like learning at the same rate as the characters and I'm experiencing it all as they are. And yeah, writing Keely's story, it was like really interesting because like I was discovering her and who this character was as I was writing, but at the same time I was trying to like make sure that it did actually have like a cohesive plot as well, and that it did sort of hit all the tropes for like thrillers and all like the sort of expectations that readers would have. Because I know with my very first draft of it, it did read more sort of like life story, like almost like a character's memoir, because it had like the rise and fall of the tension, but it didn't build up to like any sort of massive like climax scene at the end. So that was something that I then introduced in revisions, and that was very much sort of like about making sure structurally it worked as a thriller, albeit a dystopian thriller. So you have still got the genre elements present in sort of like fantasy, dystopian, and science fiction, as well as sort of like romantic suspense as well. So yeah, it's a bit of an amalgamation of a lot of different things, this book, and for me that's why it's so exciting, because it's a bit difficult to categorize it, and I wouldn't necessarily want to like categorize it so like solidly, because it is its own book, and I find it really interesting speaking to readers and hearing what they class it as, because some people I've heard like say, oh, it's definitely dystopian, other people are like, no, it's science fiction, other people are like, oh no, it's like apocalyptic thriller. And I find it so interesting hearing what the different readers take from it and which genre they sort of like place it in more, because it's just really interesting, and it shows that although I can like put all these words on a page, a lot of the sort of like meaning that readers take from it is going to be based on their own interpretation. And I think with like the audiobook as well, like the way that you narrate it is going to be sort of like putting your interpretation on it as well, like especially with like when you choose to pause or when you choose to like speed up your narration a little bit. So yeah, like I'm just really interested to like listen to the whole thing now.
Yeah, and it's so funny too, thinking about genre. And when I read the book before I was going to narrate it, I read through the whole story and I couldn't sort of pinpoint what to call it. And that was one of the reasons why I was excited to explore the characters and explore the story, because you know, I hope that anyone who listens to the audiobook will realize, anyone who's read the book or will read the book will know this, that, the chapters, each of them for the most part, they all end in a very exciting place.
Yeah.
And that was always something that, I loved that structure to the story for me, because, when you're narrating a chapter at a time, I never felt that I was pausing in a place of, okay, everything's, like, taken care of.
Yeah.
There's always sort of threads left undone, to lead you into that sort of what happens next feeling. And I was feeling that as the reader and as the narrator, as even as I was reading the book aloud and narrating it, and I had already, read the story. I knew what was coming, and yet I still found myself hooked into that structure of finishing a chapter and feeling in myself that sense of, oh my gosh, like, what's next? Like, what happens now? Um, and that's the sensation that I think does give the book a thrilling quality. But it's so true that there is so much more going on in the story and in the themes of the story, and the arcs of the characters, I think, go much deeper than your average thriller. With these conversations about mental health and these explorations of relationships and friendships and familial connection and all of these things that I think you don't commonly find in just sort of your average thriller. And I think that complicates its sort of genre classification, because you don't quite know where to put it, because it's sort of um, is kind of steeped in many different
Mhm.
kinds of storytelling.
Yeah, definitely. And I suppose with like thrillers, they sort of like usually center around one main crime as well. And a
Mm.
Dangerous Game doesn't have this like one main crime. It's like the antagonists aren't revealed to be antagonists until certain parts of the plot. So then at certain points, you don't actually know who the villains are.
Mhm.
And one challenge I had in writing this book is that it's actually set before the Untamed series, like the other four books that I'd written in the same world. And the end of A Dangerous Game overlaps with the start of book one. And it
Mm.
overlaps by about 2 or 3 days. So then you've got the same events taking place, but I didn't want to just be sort of like rewriting the same thing without giving anything new. So I had to construct this sort of like ending that would be appropriate for A Dangerous Game, but that would also fit in with the events already established at the beginning of the Untamed series. And therefore, because a lot of the characters in A Dangerous Game also appear in the Untamed series, so I couldn't really make one of them like this massive villain, because that wouldn't have been explored in the Untamed series because I'd already written those four books. So
Mm.
that sort of muddied the waters a bit with how I would have normally plotted a like dystopian thriller, because there were lots of elements and like reveals and twists that I simply couldn't do because it would have been contradicting the Untamed series, which shares the world and some of the characters. So I think that's why it also seems like less of a conventional thriller, and it's very much like this amalgamation of all different genres and different explorations of like different themes. And I think, yeah, like I was really happy with the way that I'd managed to sort of like tie it all together at the end, because it does feel sort of to me like a whole sort of like cohesive story. And
Mm.
I know a lot of readers have read that book without having read my Untamed series, and then that's made them sort of want to read my Untamed series as well. So it does kind of like work a bit as a lead in, but I didn't want it just to work as a lead in. It was like I needed it to be a standalone with like these sort of like suspenseful elements. So yeah, it is a really weird one, and still I never know quite how to categorize it.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, it's a very exciting progression through, like you're saying, it's very much feels like a I think, what you were saying earlier about how most thrillers sort of have this one central crime,
Mhm.
I think one of the things that makes A Dangerous Game a particularly exciting book to read is what you were saying before about this way that the book travels through sort of several different conflicts that are all connected in ways that you don't always understand until later on, or you realize that something makes sense suddenly that you didn't know had a connection to another thing earlier on. And I think that that is sort of something that really carries through to the end of the
Mhm.
story, even though, like you're saying, you were sort of limited by the parameters that you'd already set for yourself in what you'd
Mhm.
already written in these, following stories. It's still the last several chapters of the book carry forth that quality of, these sort of complex narratives linking and sort of um, coming together in ways that you would not have anticipated. And I think it really does feel like the kind of story that grips you from start to finish.
Oh, thank you so much. That's so wonderful to hear.
Yeah.
So, yeah, like I'm just thinking because at the moment I'm working on the third book in like this series because I called it the Dangerous One series, and then like A Dangerous Game is book one. Then we've got book two, which is This Vicious Way, and book three. It should release like December-ish. I'm still writing it. It's called The Threat of the Hunt, and yeah, because I had to remind myself of exactly how I'd approach Keely's story. So I've been rereading that recently, and then I've been sort of like taking out these little threads in it that don't really seem that important in that book, but I've been using that to sort of propel like a massive event in the third book.
Mm,
And the third book I'm finding really exciting because I'm able to link it back to Keely and her story in book one, and then Inga and her story in book two, because book three's got another new narrator as well, and I'm having so much fun sort of like tying it all in and like bringing sort of like the different threads and having book three refer to events in book one. But yeah, I have actually been plotting that one as more of a traditional thriller with like the central crime, and
mm,
it's just like, and as I've just reread A Dangerous Game as well to sort of like familiarize myself with it, it's made me realize just like how different A Dangerous Game is at times, because like it's really connected to the others, like yes, but then it's also got a lot of like side commentaries going on, and
mhm.
book two has that as well. So I think when I'm like working on revisions for book three, I need to sort of like bring in more commentaries and more like other themes as well to sort of like make it feel more unified as a trilogy. But
Hmm.
yeah, like I just love like picking out little things in book one that I wrote without having any intention of revisiting, and now I'm just thinking of, well, what can I do with that to make it like increase the stakes of what the characters are now facing. And it's so fun as well when each book has different main characters, because then it's like a whole new blank canvas and I can kind of just do whatever I want, and I find that really exciting because again I'm not really plotting at all, I'm just seeing where the story takes me.
Yeah, and that you also still have this, this vocabulary of possible connections to draw for yourself from one book to another.
Yeah.
That I imagine that's something very exciting about creating a series, is being able to link the books together in ways that, aren't necessarily just bringing the narrator with you from one book to the next, but
Mhm.
bringing more sort of complex and nuanced ties
Mhm.
together so that the books feel like a unified um, sort of unit, a
Yeah.
unified unit, but that they kind of bring together this follow through of themes and ideas and connections that
Mhm.
are probably just really exciting to discover on your own before you even give them to readers.
Yeah, definitely. And like with this whole trilogy being very much like a blend of many different genres as well. Like although the third book is more of a traditional thriller in terms of structure, I'm still having to like weave in like the dystopian, the fantasy, the
Mm,
apocalypse, the sci-fi. Um, and yeah, it's really fun, and it's really challenging as well. And I'm finding it slightly harder to write that than sort of like a straightforward contemporary thriller, because then I don't really have to worry about the world building as much. And with this one, it's like I can have fun with the world building, but I can't contradict anything in previous books.
Right.
Yeah, so it's a challenge, but it's keeping me entertained, and I think that's like the important thing when I write, because if I'm not enjoying it, I know that readers are probably not going to enjoy it as much. Like it's going to come through. So yeah, I'm just really like excited by this trilogy, especially when it's different to the 4-book series that's already in the same world. It's like very much different tone, and yeah, and like it can be read with no prior knowledge of like the 4-book series as well. So
That's exciting. Well, I'm excited to read the rest of the series.
thank you. So, yeah, I think we're coming up to the end of the time now. So, was there anything that you'd like to say to viewers, sort of like where they can find you online, that sort of stuff?
Sure, you're welcome to visit my website, www.posielewis.com, for more information about me and what I'm up to, the projects that I'm involved in. And I would just encourage everyone watching to check out A Dangerous Game on Audible. It's going to be launching very soon. If not when this video is visible, it might even be available. So keep an eye out for it, and check out all the hard work that has gone into the writing process and the narration process, and enjoy.
Oh, thank you so much. And yeah, you're just like an amazing narrator. So I'm just so happy with this.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited that it's going to be available, and I'm excited for people to be able to listen to it start to finish.
Me too. Yeah, thank you.